Summer days on the Amtrak Michigan Line are always great for rail fans. With multiple Amtrak and Norfolk Southern freight trains, historic stations, high-speed rail service, and beautiful lake state scenery, the Michigan Line has plenty of exciting features to satisfy the likes of any railroad enthusiast. On July 10, 2018, we were on location in Jackson, Michigan, after receiving word about a special PTC test train on the Amtrak Michigan Line. It was just after 7 p.m. when the train came to a stop at Control Point 75. Between May and July of that year, the PTC, or Positive Train Control Equipment, had been tested several times between Chelsea and Kalamazoo to make sure that the new system was functioning properly. In charge of the train were two Genesis P-42s, numbers 58 and 68. Since the two GE locomotives were not equipped with the incremental train control system that's used on the Amtrak-owned section of the railroad between Kalamazoo and Porter, Indiana, the only way the locomotives could travel west over the Michigan Line was if a waiver was given to the crew or if the equipment was towed behind an ITCS-equipped locomotive. The solution? Tag the locomotives onto a westbound Wolverine service train. Scheduled to arrive at 7:27 p.m., Amtrak Wolverine train number 355 approached Jackson Station about 10 minutes behind schedule. The test train would piggyback off the rear end of train 355 going west, being towed all the way to Chicago that night.
For Jackson, and on the approach limited, head west, clear the signal.
After departing Jackson Station, the 355 will stop just east of Blackstone Street on Jackson Hill so that the PTC test train could cross over from Main 2 to Main 1. After crossing over, the PTC test train would then tie on to the rear of 355.
Amtrak engine 58, calling Michigan Line, train director, over.
Train director, go ahead, over.
We're here on CP 75, ready to make our move on the back of 355, over.
Roger that, stand by and see if we can get you a signal. 355 ready for your connection, over. 355 Don't back up or anything for my instruction to give you. And we'll see if we can get Amtrak 58 up to you. Roger that. 355 standing by, now moving over.
Once train 355 had stopped near Blackstone Street, the PTC test train departed CP 75, crossing over to Main 1. At Blackstone Street, we witnessed a horde of Amtrak employees who were trackside to complete the move and coupling of the PTC test train to Wolverine number 355. In 2012, the Michigan Department of Transportation purchased 135 miles of the former Michigan Central Railroad main line from the Norfolk Southern Corporation between Dearborn and Kalamazoo, Michigan. At the time, Norfolk Southern was no longer interested in maintaining track conditions that allowed for reliable passenger service, so the state of Michigan stepped in to purchase the line for an estimated $150 million. Norfolk Southern would remain the freight operator, but the state and Amtrak would take over the maintenance and dispatching to enhance passenger service. Eventually, MDOT and Amtrak hoped to upgrade the entire Dearborn to Kalamazoo corridor to allow for speeds up to 110 miles per hour. Through federal funding, the state has received nearly $200 million for upgrading the line to high-speed standards. Amtrak has actually owned the 97 miles of track between Kalamazoo and Porter, Indiana, since 1976. The first high-speed train to run on that portion of the Michigan line operated on February 7, 2012. After the test train was coupled up to the 355, the passenger train departed Jackson around 8:05 p.m. The entire process delayed the usually on-time train by an additional 25 minutes.
355, okay to depart. Our location, we were on the approach limited. We are delayed and blocked, over.
Roger that, 355 understands. Man equipment and clear, okay to depart. On the approach limited, let me give AML a call, and then we'll be on the way over. Track 355, Amtrak Michigan Line train director, over. AML, go ahead, over. Yes, sir, Amtrak 355, our work at Jackson's complete. Trains are together. I need your authority to proceed, over. 355, permission westward, present location. All tied together, over.
Here we go, delayed and blocked on that approach.
Roger that. Delayed and blocked on the approach limited. 355, here we go.
After witnessing the interesting Amtrak move, we decided to visit Norfolk Southern's Jackson Yard, where local freight train B33 was just about to depart for its westbound evening trip to Kalamazoo. Leading train B33 this evening was Norfolk Southern Snoot Nose SD40-2, number 3452, which is one of only 6 such locomotives on the roster. In total, Norfolk Southern owns 5 116-inch Snoot Nose locomotives and 1 102-inch Snoot Nose locomotive. The 3452 is a former Union Pacific unit, acquired by Norfolk Southern in 2011 from CEFX. The locomotive was repainted in early 2018 and was equipped with PTC array on top of the cab, along with an electronic handbrake. The extremely loud horn, which was originally located right above the cab, has been moved to the center of the long hood. Trailing behind the 3452 on this hot summer evening was a former Southern Railway SD40-2, now equipped with an Admiral cab, and a former Conrail SD50 locomotive that's now designated as an SD40E. The B33 would depart the yard shortly after 8:30 p.m. In 2018, the train operated between Jackson and Kalamazoo Sunday through Thursday, and usually departed Jackson Yard after 8 p.m. The train interchanged with the Grand Elk Railroad in Kalamazoo, a Watco company that now operates the former Norfolk Southern Grand Rapids to Elkhart Main Line. As of 2021, B33 now operates between Jackson and Battle Creek. Instead of interchanging with Grand Elk at Kalamazoo, Norfolk Southern now moves freight east out of Jackson to Wayne, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. From Wayne, trains run south to Toledo, Ohio, before going west over the Chicago line and on to Elkhart, Indiana. At the time of this video, train B33 often ranged between 20 to 60 cars in length. This evening's train was a mere 23 cars long. Since B33's length varied so much in outbound tonnage, crews enjoyed running it as a road train. It wasn't uncommon to see 3 or 4 SD40-2s leading the train on any given night. At Jackson Station, we captured the train ducking under the CP75 cantilever signal as it left the yard lead for Main 2 on the Amtrak Michigan Line. Once B-33 cleared the freight yard lead, the train was permitted to maintain track speed. Though Jackson Hill is a mere 0.66% gradient out of town, it's no easy task getting heavy freight trains up the hill while only maintaining 10 miles per hour for most of the ascent. This evening's short train wasn't much of a challenge for veteran engineer Matt Barron, who handled the train regularly between Jackson and Kalamazoo. Together with veteran conductor Cliffy Carlisle, the B-33 would make it safely over the road. This evening, we chased the B-33 between Jackson and Battle Creek. The Wildwood Robinson Road grade crossing near Reynolds Field Airport is at the top of the 2-mile-long Jackson Hill. It's also the west end of Jackson Siding. In the small community of Parma, Michigan, we caught the train at speed as it ducked under the old US 12 overpass. At Albion, Michigan, a 3-mile siding between CP96 and CP99 allows Amtrak and Norfolk Southern trains to meet. At the west end of the siding, we caught the B-33 again as it continued onto the single-track main west of town. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we captured the westbound train once more from the Michigan Avenue Overpass Bridge at milepost 117. At Battle Creek, B-33 was held for Amtrak Wolverine 354 at the west end of Hinman Yard. While B-33 waited for the Amtrak train, we visited with the train crew while taking in the sweet aroma of Fruity Pebbles, which were being manufactured at the Post factory right next to the main line. Battle Creek is known for being Cereal City, USA, due to the fact that both Post and Kellogg's are headquartered there. Both companies have been making cereals in Battle Creek for over 125 years. With Amtrak P42 number 26 in the lead, we watched as Wolverine train number 354 crossed over from Canadian National Rails onto the Amtrak Michigan Line at C.P. Barron. Once 354 had cleared the way, the westbound B-33 would continue to Kalamazoo, where it would interchange with the Grand Elk around midnight. This was the last location we caught B-33 before calling it a night. We decided to instead catch the train on its return trip back to Jackson around 6 a.m. the following morning. After a few hours of rest, we got up early on the morning of July 11th and set up our cameras at the Jackson Station platform around 5:30. To our surprise, local freight train B22 was returning from its work in Albion with GP 40-2 number 3015 leading the train east. The B22 is the Jackson to Albion turn job, which operates Mondays through Fridays, serving several customers including the Anderson's Ethanol Plant, Georgia Pacific, Metal Casting, and Guardian Fiberglass. After observing the arrival of train B22, we paused to reflect on the surrounding area before the arrival of train B33. Downtown Jackson hadn't quite hit the morning rush hour yet, and the sun was just starting to show on the horizon. Located 1 mile west of Jackson Yard, the Amtrak station is the oldest continuously operated passenger rail station in the United States, being open every day, rain or shine, since September 1st, 1873. Around 6:15, we heard the familiar sound of a Nathan P3 air horn. Train B33 was returning to Jackson after its long night of work in Kalamazoo. After interchanging with the Grand Elk, the B33 picked up an additional locomotive, Norfolk Southern High Hood GP 38-2, number 5196, for use on the B-22 local. Since locomotive number 3015 was the only unit in Jackson assigned to train B-22, the additional locomotive was needed to handle the often heavy train between Jackson and Albion. However, due to an issue with the locomotive's sewage system, the 5196 would immediately be sent back on the westbound B-33 later that evening. In 2018, seeing a high hood locomotive leading any train, whether on locals or on road trains, was becoming a very rare occurrence outside of yard operations. With poor visibility from the high short hood and long hood forward operation, crews don't favor these locomotives. As a result, Norfolk Southern rebuilt and equipped many of the 5000 to 5100 series locomotives with Admiral cabs to increase visibility, leaving only the radio control equipped high hoods remaining on the roster. In fact, all of Norfolk Southern's 6-axle high hoods have been retired or rebuilt, excluding only the former N&W 1600 series, which are used in yard service. On August 17, 2017, Norfolk Southern sold 62 of its high hood GP38-2s at an auction in Roanoke, Virginia, thinning the roster even further. Arriving at Jackson Yard, Matt and Cliffy would tie the train down, leaving the consist to be sorted out by the afternoon yard job, train B44. About an hour after the B-33 arrived at Jackson, Amtrak Wolverine Service Train 351 arrived at the station. The morning eastbound train is one of the most popular on the Michigan Line. With its early Chicago arrival, passengers are able to spend an entire day exploring the Windy City. Jackson Station is the 13th most popular passenger station in Michigan, with an annual ridership of over 23,300 people in 2017 alone. At the throttle of Amtrak P42 number 28 this morning was none other than Lee Lovelet, an eccentric character that loves his job on the railroad. After the short station stop, Train 351 slowly eased out of Jackson, about 10 minutes behind schedule. Later that day, we returned to Jackson Yard to document train B44 delivering steel coils to Miller Trucking and Storage. At the throttle of Locomotive 3015 was engineer DJ Beam, and working the ground was conductor Benny Valdez. The former Conrail GP40-2 looked right at home in local yard service. We apologize to our viewers who find the graffiti on the lead coil car offensive. Unfortunately, vandalism is something that occurs often in the railroad industry, and we didn't feel it was necessary to blur it out. If anything, it serves as a visual reminder to report vandals who destroy railroad property. With the loaded steel coils in tow, the crew would shove down the spur to grab the empties. Once the empties were added to the consist, they were then pulled out and set off on the runaround. Afterwards, the crew would then shove the loaded coil cars into place for delivery at Miller Trucking. In early 2018, Miller began receiving rail service for a customer in Ann Arbor. The steel coils are brought in by rail and are stored inside Miller's main warehouse facility until they are then trucked the rest of the way to the customer. Miller is the proud owner of the former Michigan Central Railroad shops, which permanently closed as a repair facility in the mid-1970s. After a series of fires, Miller Trucking rebuilt most of the interior of the historic shop buildings that are now utilized as a warehouse and storage space for large equipment and machinery for its customers. We spoke with Dave Hines, Miller's vice president and general manager, to learn more about their business.
Miller Truck and Storage is a family-owned business owned by the Miller family. It was started by Leo Miller, and we incorporated in 1960. And as the buildings here at the old roundhouse became available, we'd purchase them, rebuild them, re-roof them, insulate them, and heat them. So this entire complex is now owned by Miller Truck and Storage and some real estate holding companies. But we do industrial contracting, machine removing, warehousing, distribution, some of which involves rail. We get material in by rail, we unload it and load it on trucks to deliver it to different customers. About 60% of our business is the rigging, and about 15% is trucking, 15% is warehousing. So it's spread out a little bit, but we've got a lot of exposure to the rail. We work with Norfolk Southern on many rail projects, and it's an asset to have it here in the yard, and warehouses work out very well for us. We initially rented these buildings from Conrail, one at a time. We started with one of the smaller warehouses, then got into the buildings as the railroad would leave them. We probably started getting buildings here in the late 60s. All the buildings here are for storage one way or another. The building that we're in now, the old maintenance away building, which was originally the old tender shop, is where the riggers work out of. And this is 58,000 square feet, and it's basically filled with customer machinery. We don't own any of the machines in here. They're all, people pay rent and store their machines in here. In Warehouse 5 next door, which was the Locomotive shop, we lease space to Consumers Energy. We have steel bars over there, steel plates, and some more machinery, but it's a mix of different materials. We had a fire here in Warehouse 5, July 1st of 1976, that burned the roof off, and that was the start. We redid the steel structure, we insulated it, we sheeted it, standing seam metal roof, and heated it. And that was the first building we did, and then after that we did the other buildings, and then we have since built 2 new buildings on this facility.
Warehouse number 5 is the former Michigan Central Railroad Locomotive shop. It's also the same building where the unloaded steel coils are stored. Miller uses a trackmobile to move the cars into the building and utilizes overhead cranes to place the coils on the floor. This building was where the Michigan Central and later New York Central built and repaired steam locomotives for nearly 80 years. The other Michigan Central locomotive facility was at St. Thomas, Ontario, and is now a museum. These beautiful photos from Wayne State University show Jackson shops sometime in the early 1940s. In the spring of 1949, the shops closed temporarily because of a Toledo coal strike. They were supposed to reopen in July of that year, but due to industry change and the gradual transition from steam to diesel, it was decided that the shops would no longer be used as a steam locomotive facility. The remainder of the buildings in the yard were used for generalized repair and storage until Conrail leased and later sold the property to Miller in the late 1970s. Once Locomotive 3015 had tied on to the empty coil cars on the runaround, the short consist traveled down the Jackson Y, where conductor Valdez would throw the switch for the train to shove back into the yard. Later in the evening, we returned to Jackson Yard to watch train B33 depart for Kalamazoo one more time. This evening, the sunshine was much more prevalent, allowing for much better photography conditions in golden hour light. The train this evening was much longer and heavier than before, which allowed us to capture the locomotives working really hard up Jackson Hill. At the throttle again was engineer Matt Barron, and the conductor was Justin Gafford. B-33's locomotive consist remained the same as it did earlier that morning, with the 5196 now trailing fourth out. The high hood Jeep would be returned to the Grand Elk Railroad in Kalamazoo for the eventual transport back to Elkhart, Indiana. From Stewart Avenue near Jackson High School, we zoomed in and focused our camera on the 3452 as the train ascended the hill. We decided to capture train B33 one last time at Albion, Michigan. The small town still retains its 1882 vintage depot, which is used by Amtrak daily. At Control Point 96, the train took the siding where the crew would wait for eastbound Amtrak Train 354. The passenger train would roll through Albion well after dark. This would mark the end of our summer days on the Amtrak Michigan Line. We hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching Delay in Block Productions. Until next time, happy railroading.